Okay, so this morning I'm going to do a couple of mini demos. The first one is actually, I'm going to take this netuse command that you see on the screen that I use to map um, an X drive to my Samba share on my Samba system. Now, it's not going to work right this second because my file server is not up. Technically speaking, I should probably start that because I really do want to test this properly. Okay, so as I was saying, what I'm going to do today is to demonstrate a way to automate a network mapping. There's more than one way to do this, really. Um, One way is to set up a network map in the GUI. I tried to find this Samba share on my Samba server. That way, it wasn't working, so I decided to do this the old-fashioned way. What I'm going to do fundamentally is to write a batch file, a batch script. Batch scripting is actually kind of the nomenclature is very old, from the days of batch processing, back when interactive computing wasn't nearly as common as well, interactive computing is now ubiquitous. But in the old days, you kind of had to feed your job to a mainframe or mini computer, and it would churn for a while, and then it would come back to you at some point in the future, um, because they really weren't multitasking um, machines, and they had a tiny fraction of the capability of what we would now consider to be a relatively antiquated computer. By the standards of probably 20 or 30 years ago, the computer you've got on your desk right now, or the computer you're holding in your hands, if you're watching this on a portable device, is comparatively speaking a supercomputer. Granted, it's not a Cray or one of the great big, massively processing scientific uh, supercomputers they throw at things like climate modeling or astrophysics or anything like that. Um, it can't beat a chess grandmaster in chess, but it is a lot more powerful than the things we used to have. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically now batch programming in its simplest form has some similarities to shell scripting in its simplest form, which is to say you basically figure out a line of command line input that you would like to use, you make sure it works, you put it in a file, and then instead of typing the command out by hand, you invoke the name of the file, and that runs the command. Some of my simple batch scripts are that way. Basically, I have a batch script on the Linux box over there that will just kind of um, update Fedora whenever it's ready to go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this netuse command, netuse x, and actually I'll call this the L drive because this is the Linux class. / samba.tstc.local. Now, of course, this will only work if my infrastructure server is up. If my infrastructure server is not up, this name will not resolve and this doesn't work. So if you really want to make sure this is working, you might actually have to go for the IP address. But honestly, I don't want to do that. What if I decide to readdress my services? Or more to the point, maybe I decide that, hey, I really don't want my NFS server and my Samba server on the same box. What if I move one of them? Rather than having to go around to every computer that has this batch script and give it the right IP address, I just let DNS do the work. So, /shares/AMP. Now, so what? No, it's this is the step at which things can tend to go wrong with you. Now, there's a couple things you should not do when you're trying to build a batch file. Don't create an empty text file in a Windows directory and then hope to rename it, because you're going to have to work your way around the fact that if you do that, Windows, whether you tell it that the file name ends with .txt is going to tag one on at the end. And then as long as there's a .txt file extension at the end, Windows, because it takes file extensions seriously, that's another thing that makes Windows and Linux different. Linux doesn't need the file extension to figure out what kind of file it is, because everything that really matters about the file is in the metadata. So we're going to do File, Save As. Now, if you just call this map Samba, and you don't change the save type, it will save as a text file. It will not run as a batch file. If Windows doesn't recognize that it's a batch file, it doesn't know that it's an executable file. This is essentially how we have to go about setting what we would think of as the execute bit on a Linux box. Now, within a Linux system, you create your file, you write your shell script. Then you go in, you change its mode, and you flip the execute bit. With this, we actually have to set the file extension in order to set the execute bit, as it were. So I'm going to call this map L drive. And I'm going to change this to all files. That will allow us to save this as a batch file. In some older versions of Windows, say Windows 7, the all file types might have a notation on it that is an ANSI file or an ASCII file, something like that. See, and there it is right there, encoding ANSI. We don't need to worry about Unicode or UTF or anything like that. ANSI, the American National Standards Institute, that file type is fine for this. So save. So I'm going to go here, and I'm going to go in my documents. See, it sees it as a batch file, not as. And actually, let's see if. Now I have to break this. Actually, the simplest way to do this is actually to reboot. Actually, this PC. So I'm going to disconnect. Bam. And it's going to go away in just a second. Start my command interpreter again. Okay, so the X drive is gone. Now, one thing to note, Windows really doesn't like putting batch files in the C drive down on the root, because that can be used in some cases to compromise the system. Say, for example, if you hide a batch file and you put a reference to it in your run start, or run once registry keys, so that you could potentially create a batch file which would would determine whether that a system which you're trying to compromise, whether it has been compromised, and if not, to recompromise it, or if it is compromised, to reach out to its command and control, something like that. That's why they've made it harder recently in the last few years to put a batch file in your C drive. I guess because it is more dangerous there. Anyway, so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to put this on my desktop. Boom. So of course, the last stage of any we're basically doing the systems development lifecycle in miniature here. We decide what we want to do, we think about how to do it, we test it. You are not done until you have tested your solution. If I do this and it doesn't work, I have to figure out why. Now, one more thing. Let me make sure, I've noticed this down in the corner. Let me make sure that my network is okay. My infrastructure server is up. I never logged into it, but I don't have to. Let me see. Status. Ethernet. And it's complaining because we have no network access, and that's fine. That's kind of what I expect. I'll go to my network and sharing center. If you're supporting Windows 10, and if you're going to be doing this for the foreseeable future, Windows 7 is going away. If it hasn't already gone away, you should work on getting it out of any system you support. If you've got an old Windows 7 box that you don't want to bring up to 10 because you don't think it can carry the load, or you aren't willing to pay for it, do what I did. Drop Debian, drop some flavor of Linux on it. When you're good and ready, nuke the Windows partition, give Debian the whole drive, and you're good. So I'm going to go to Ethernet. What I'm going to do here is details. And this is what I want to see. Good. I have an IP address in the right range. The next thing to do is nslookup samba.tscc.local. Let me make sure I can. Okay, yes, good. I can resolve this. So I'm clearly talking. I'm talking to my infrastructure server because I got a DHCP lease from it. I'm talking to the DNS service on that same system because I just resolved the name. Now let's see if this works. Boom. Okay. You might want to put a pause in that at some point because whether it worked or whether it failed, it did so silently. That may not be what you want. So let's go see. Okay. I'm going to actually, I'm going to add a pause here because aha, of course. I realized it probably wanted me to log in. So hold on, let me check that. Let me fix that. And I realized I had a logic error. There is a netuse command and a netuser command. I typed netuser, which you can use to learn information about a user or change a user's password, things like that. I typed the wrong command, and of course it didn't work. But I'm going to add the pause here. Save it. Close it. Invoke it. Okay. AMP. Okay. And now, let's see. Now let's see if it's there. And yes, it is. Good. So the next time I want to map to this Samba share, all I have to do is click the shortcut. Thanks for watching.